How would you describe the strategy of the Together for Yes campaign?
Well, first of all, I'd say it was very thoughtful, long planned, and very careful, because we knew, because we have a very contentious history of abortion referendums in this country. This was going to be our 6th time round in 3 separate sets of referendums, that we really had to change the narrative. We had to change the position, and we had to absolutely focus on the electorate and get the voters to think about abortion in a different way. And we had to really get them to think about it as something which a woman needs, so that you move it from being so much of a moral issue as to being something which a woman needs for her health and for her well-being in the world. And that also meant that we were very consciously moving it from being very centered on the fetus to being much more centered on a woman and her needs and her rights and her agency. So really you could say that we had 3 messages in the campaign, and they really sum up the fundamental strategy. And those messages were care, compassion, and also change. So we were trying to change something which had been a near total prohibition on abortion. And then strategically, we also knew that we had to lead a campaign which would be evidence-based, rational in tone, really quite moderate, that we didn't need to convince our own people. We didn't need a strong pro-choice argument because we were already pro-choice. And we certainly weren't going to convince the opposition, who styled themselves pro-life, because they weren't going to be convinced by anything we had to say anyway. So we were looking at, our strategy was aimed at those voters who were between those 2 poles. So that tends to be called the middle ground, which nobody likes to be called. But we call them the concerned center. They were people who needed to be given good reasons based on evidence as to why abortion was important, but who also needed to feel empathetically, to have that empathetic understanding of why abortion is necessary. Because we all know that we all vote with our heads and with our hearts, with emotion. So we needed to appeal to both dimensions. That strategy came very directly from focus group research that we did repeatedly in the lead-up years, and people really didn't want to talk about abortion. As soon as they heard pro-choice or abortion, they kind of reached a moral and ethical impasse. They didn't know what to do. So when you started talking to them in other ways and saying, well, women should surely be able to make decisions about their own health and about their bodies and about their social well-being, just shifting that word to decision really helped. And then later in the conversation, you can use the word choice. But what I'm saying is that very small shifts in language really help people to hear you differently, to hear you afresh, and to be prepared to listen to you.
The strategy of the Together for Yes campaign was very much about bringing together all possible advocacy, activist, reproductive rights, community groups, anybody who had ever expressed a position or been active or campaigned on this issue. And in the end, there were nearly 70 groups in the Together for Yes campaign. There had been so many various groups, whether it was from the Abortion Rights Campaign, the very first one, through to organizations like Doctors for Choice, which was entirely separate, through to local groups. So where I live in Cork, there's a Cork reproductive rights group called initially Cork Women's Right to Choose, and then just became Cork Reproductive Rights, and then Cork for Repeal, and then Cork for Together for Yes. So that was mirrored in loads and loads of areas around the country. And so that was the plan. We were one of the 70 organizations, but we were probably one of the first 5 involved because we were one of the more important ones in terms of getting us on board. And then loads and loads came after that. So you had the trade unions got involved, the students' unions got involved, Psychologists for Choice. That was how it formed. The strategy then was that it was a single issue campaign. It was only about repeal. but it was also with a view to trying to push and promote what would come next. The strategic plan was to support the government proposals, try to have repeal and basically support the government proposals along the lines of this was the best we can get. The biggest stumbling block in that was that there was a mandatory 3-day waiting period introduced fairly late in the day, very much to appease the Conservatives. And one of the stressors of being in the Together for Yes campaign, very much for Doctors for Choice, but particularly for many organisations, particularly the ones who'd campaigned for many years, was our need to stay on message and all agree and all say the same things and not criticise the proposals. And that caused a lot of tensions, both in the wider Together for Yes campaign and then internally in organisations, including in our own. The strategy then was to layer out messaging, starting with very simple, easy messages, working off of the hard luck stories first, largely around fatal fetal anomaly, rape victims, the standard stuff, the good abortions. And as the campaign went on over 8 weeks, to make the messaging more subtle towards the end, to go for all abortions for no reason, the woman's reason, it's her choice. And so the messaging changed a lot.